Denver Broncos defensive coordinator Vance Joseph is receiving interest from other teams for their vacancies at head coach. If the Broncos lose him, what does that mean for the progress the defense has made? We'll analyze that and much more on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every single day. Locked on Playoff Broncos is where we are headed here. So Broncos Country, appreciate you for joining us alongside the ride. All the everydayers and first listeners out there in Broncos Country, thanks for making the show exactly what it is for when you want the best Broncos news coverage, content analysis, and more, and you want it every single day, all year long. Locked on Broncos is the place to be. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, Sci Expert, predominantlyorange.com. We got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show as playoff week is officially here. We'll wrap things up by talking about really how Sean Payton's mindset has changed the culture of the Broncos, and the young and hungry Denver Broncos are proving a lot of people wrong this season. We'll talk about Denver's 2025 opponents. They are officially set for next season. We're going to kick things off, though, with the biggest story of the day. Defensive coordinator Vance Joseph receiving interest from some teams around the NFL for their vacancies at head coach. And it creates a lot of questions here for the Denver Broncos. We'll answer that here on today's episode show, which is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, and new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sayre, I mean, this is it. Obviously, we found out that the New York Jets had interest in Vance Joseph for their vacant head coaching job. And obviously, this is something that's going to happen with your coordinators, especially if you're having success in a lot of areas here. So really, let's take a look at this. Is New York a great fit for Vance Joseph? And also, if Vance departs, what does this mean for the Broncos and the defense?
Well, I think first of all, we got to look at is this a, good situation potentially for him to go to? Because remember, I think in the back of Vance Joseph's mind, you're thinking about the 2017 Broncos with instability in the ownership situation. The coaching situation obviously was in, a state of transition. The roster very much in a state of transition. The quarterback position unsettled. And so you look at that situation and you think, okay, man, shoot, I don't know if the New York Jets are exactly where I would want to be, but if I'm Vance Joseph, Cody, I'm doing the interview, I'm brushing up on those skills and things like that for head coaching interviews and kind of just going over like, hey, this is what I would do, or this is what I see from the outside looking in. I don't mind him doing that. But at the same time, if I was him, I would be a little more patient here and waiting for, you're not always going to get a golden opportunity, right? You're not always going to inherit the best team in the NFL, but I'm sure better situations will come along. And I think it's important to note that if Vance Joseph does leave as a head coach to another team, the Denver Broncos would be compensated 2 third-round picks as part of the policy, or whatever you want to call it, the reward system that the NFL has for minority coaches getting hired after spending 2 years or more with an organization. Vance obviously now been around 2 years, so if he gets hired by another team, the Denver Broncos would get a third-round pick in 2025, and I believe a third-round pick in 2026 as well.
Sean Payton did say in his Monday press conference with us that he does believe that Vance will be a head coach again someday, whether that's this year, whether that's, another year down the road. But, man, I just don't see New York being a good fit. Like, for Vance to go through what he went through in Denver with some of the things that you just mentioned there, I mean, talk about – I think that – honestly, I think the New York Jets job is the most unappealing head coaching job in this entire cycle. I don't actually think there's a great destination for a head coach to go here. Like, obviously, Ben Johnson, one of the most hottest names in the last couple of years, OC for the Detroit Lions, already said, like, I have no interest in interviewing for the New York Jets job. Like, said, like, don't even submit a request. I'm not interested. Like, not there specifically. That should tell you all you need to know. So, for Vance, I mean, it just depends how much do you want to be a head coach again. But I think so much for Vance at this point, it's got to be the right fit. It's got to make sense for him, for his family. I mean, you go to New York, the level of scrutiny you face from the smallest errors is amplified significantly. And as we've seen, players have left the New York Jets the coaches have left the New York Jets. They've gone on to have more, I'd say, stress-free careers. They've had more success. So maybe something to monitor there. Don't think the New York one is the right thing. But let's play the hypothetical game right here. If the Broncos lose Vance Joseph to a head coaching gig, what does that mean internally for the defense? Because so much of it is you want to keep things the same. Jim Leonhard is an in-house name that obviously I think would probably be the favorite to be promoted to defensive coordinator. But from what I know, Jim Leonhard also may get some interest in him from the Indianapolis Colts, who just fired Gus Bradley. And I also saw something about maybe Clemson has an opening at defensive coordinator. They may have interest in Jim Leonhard for that. So Jim Leonhard, not the only person. I mean, Vance Joseph's not the only person. Jim Leonhard getting some interest as well. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing relatively when your coaches have interest from other teams. But I mean, it puts the Broncos in a very interesting situation if they were to lose Vance Joseph. Also, if they were able to, also in a position to lose Jim Leonhard as well.
Yeah, it's one of those situations that I'm sure Sean Payton has gone through the contingencies in advance, because you assemble a coaching staff like this, and I think you almost expect that, hey, we're going to lose guys, especially if we're having success, which Sean Payton expects to have success. And so you kind of just go into the year knowing that this could be a possibility. And of course, there's lots of names now out there that have been let go, like Sean Payton obviously knows Dennis Allen very well. And Dennis Allen does call a good defense, may not be the best NFL head coach, which we've seen over the course of, a couple of opportunities with the Raiders and Saints now, but the guy can call a defense. And we've seen that with Sean Payton specifically. So there's guys even from the outside that could be candidates there. We also know that David Shaw, the Broncos senior personnel advisor, who's been working in the front office on the pro and college scouting side of things, Cody, just a sharp eye for talent dating back to obviously his time at Stanford. The NFL Network hired him for the NFL draft because of his keen eye for talent and ability to evaluate guys. The Broncos have been benefiting from that this year. He may now be in line for potential coaching jobs. I know he's been getting interviewed the last couple of cycles, including by the Denver Broncos, but now Sean Payton's old team, the New Orleans Saints, is trying to bring in David Shaw, or at least talk to him about their head coach vacancy.
Yeah. So, I mean, and Sean Payton said it as well. He said, when he was in New Orleans, Mickey Loomis came to him and said, hey, like, we're getting all of our coaches are being interviewed. He said, you should be worried if they're not at that point in terms of where Denver's at. And I think Denver's assembled a really good coaching staff. Davis Webb could even also receive some potential interest for some OC jobs there. I know if things open up in New York, potentially, not the Jets, but maybe the Giants, because he did play there. He's a smart guy. What he's been able to do in terms of the Broncos quarterback room's also been impressive. It's going to be interesting to see how things kind of play out here, because this is kind of the dilemma. But the good thing, though, with Denver being in the playoffs right now, that's not going to really take place. Interviews aren't going to necessarily take place until next week. Denver's in the firm process of preparing for Buffalo. That's where Vance Joseph's mindset is at. But obviously, if Denver wins, then next week he will probably interview for that Jets job. And then, does that distract you in any way, shape, or form? Part of me feels like the idea and the myth around, well, if you interview for a head coaching job while preparing for the playoffs, it's a distraction. When you think about it, like, coaches are preparing for their games all throughout the entire week, right? And usually sometimes these interviews could be 4-6 hours. If I'm not mistaken, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think the NFL imposed like a certain time limit. You only have a certain time limit you can interview coaches, because sometimes I think we saw stuff about like 8-hour, 9-hour, 10-hour interviews taking place. And that right there is something the NFL wants to avoid. But for Denver, I mean, Sean Payton said it best. Like, he talked about Aaron Glenn, the DC of the Detroit Lions. He said there's no better interview than what he did on Sunday night against the Minnesota Vikings. So for Vance Joseph, like, against the Buffalo Bills, the Broncos defense comes out and plays great against them again, like they did that first time, minus a couple of big explosive plays by James Cook and whatnot. That's a great audition. That's a great kind of way for teams to say, hey, we actually want to bring in Vance. We want to see what is he able to do to turn things around. Very, very curious to see how it all plays out. But no better opportunity for an audition than Sunday's game against the Bills.
It's the best. I mean, you go out there, your unit plays well, do what they've done all season, get after the quarterback. I know Josh Allen this year, Cody, when he's faced off against teams that rank in the top 10 in sacks, the Bills have lost both of those games. They've only played 2 games in which they faced off against teams that rank in the top 10 in sacks. The Bills have lost both of those games. Now here come the Denver Broncos, who rank number 1 in the NFL in sacks this season. So going to be fascinating to see what happens when they go toe to toe, and how Vance Joseph or anybody else can benefit from that. Because shoot, if they win this game, if the Broncos go out, mess around and win on the road in the playoffs against the Buffalo Bills, that coaching staff is, shoot, Sean Payton, George Payton, they're going to be getting calls like, all right, I need to talk to this guy. Can we talk to this guy? Yada, yada. It's going to be a free for all. There's no doubt about it. And you're right. The success of the team, you should be more worried if you're not getting coaches teams trying to poach your coaches as opposed to the alternative.
On Broncos Country, we want to hear from you. Your thoughts on Vance Joseph receiving interest. If he departs for a job, who would you like to see step in and replace him at DC, or would you like him to stay here in Denver? Make sure you let us know here as well. But the Broncos 2025 opponents are set. And hey, Denver, with the schedule that they've got, we don't know when they're going to play, but we know who they're going to play. We're going to tell you who that is here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Jeez, I'm struggling today. All right. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs, they're better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Make sure you check out the website at FanDuel.com to see the lines on the Broncos versus the Buffalo Bills. You can get involved with same-game parlays. You can put together a multi-game parlay, anytime touchdown scores, player props, and more. Money line spreads, you name it, FanDuel, they have it for all the playoff action. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
17-0 until they ain't. Who are the Denver Broncos going to be playing in 2025? Who's getting in their way next year, Broncos Country? Well, Cody and I, we're going to break down every 2025 opponent for the Denver Broncos. We do not know the schedule as of yet. The NFL will make a big to-do about that later this year, but we do know who the Broncos will be playing. And look, it's always going to look rough on paper, but you know what? Like I said, 17-0 until we ain't. Broncos Country, thanks so much for rocking with Cody and I every single day here on the show. We appreciate you, everydayers out there, and all of you that subscribe to the show. So if you haven't done so already, we'd greatly appreciate it if you would do that. Go ahead, hit subscribe wherever you listen, as well as on YouTube and the growing community there. Cody, let's talk 2025 opponents for the Denver Broncos. Of course, I love to say 17-0 until we ain't every year. People know that it's not serious. We know that the Broncos are going 20-0. They're going to win the Super Bowl. I mean, so obviously it's a joke. But no, in all seriousness, let's talk 2025 opponents, because the Broncos have, I wouldn't say any tougher than normal, but certainly a lot of notable opponents, especially when you look at their home games next year. I mean, we could be seeing the Broncos under the lights a lot when they're playing in the Mile High City in 2025.
Yeah, look, and that's the cool thing about it, right? Every year, because of the added 17th regular season game, you alternate between 9 home games, 8 away games, and vice versa. Denver this year, they had 8 home games, they had 9 away games, and Denver had 10 wins on the season. So, hey, the road was pretty nice here for the Broncos. Can they do that this week against the Buffalo Bills? But it's going to flip now. Denver in 2025, they're going to have 9 games at home, 8 on the road. And then I think when they add the eventual 18th regular season game, you're going to get 9-9, which will be cool. You get 9 away, 9 home. Everything kind of balances out. Hopefully 2 bye weeks spread out in between there. But that's another discussion for another day. Breaking news, the Broncos are going to play the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Raiders twice. We already knew that. Obviously, the AFC West. Very curious to see what changes happen within these teams and within this division here this offseason. That'll be a big storyline here. But the divisions that the Broncos are going to play this upcoming season, right? So when you look at in conference in the AFC, they will take on the AFC South. That contains the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans, Indianapolis Colts, and the Houston Texans. Then they're going to take on the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles, Jaden Daniels, the Washington Commanders, and obviously the New York Giants. And then their 17th game is going to be against the third place of the NFC North. So that's going to be the Green Bay Packers. I mean, so Sayre, like this is going to be I would say a balanced schedule here. I think if we're basing it off of what we've seen this year, right? And I think when we talk about strength of schedule, every year it changes, right? If a team was really bad one year, they may be good the next year. Just ask the Denver Broncos. They're one of those teams that surprised a lot of people this year. So when we look at it right now, it's like, all right, Denver's got some opportunities here, but then there's also some tough teams as well. So let's take a look, Sayre, at who the Broncos are going to play at home. 9 games. We already mentioned the Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders by default of the division, but Denver's going to face the Dallas Cowboys at home, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are going to have a brand new head coach, the New York Giants, who may at some point have a new head coach, the Tennessee Titans. That'll be a very interesting one. They're going to have a new GM. The Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow. That'll be a tough one. And then Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. I mean, that home slate of games for 9 games for Denver, I like it. I think it sets up really well for them right now on paper.
It absolutely does. And I mentioned that we could be seeing them play under the lights a lot at home this season. I think you look at the Chiefs, Chargers, Cowboys, Bengals, and Packers. Those are all going to be options, I think, for the NFL to put in Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, etc. And certainly, you know, when the Broncos go on the road against lesser teams, it seems like they typically play Thursday night games on the road. I know they played 2. It was uncharacteristic this year. You have to approve of playing 2 on the road this year, but it feels like the Broncos typically play their Thursday games on the road. Maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but regardless, I feel like any of those games that I just mentioned there, like I said, Chiefs, Chargers, Bengals, Packers, Cowboys, all of those games that you're playing at home, those seem like ideal primetime matchups. So then you get into the away games, Cody. It's the divisional opponents, and then you go on the road to face Houston. You go on the road to face Indianapolis. Both of those will be indoor games. But then you play the Eagles, Commanders, and Jets on the road, and it's going to be fascinating to see, are those games going to be early in the season or late in the season? Not that the elements really matter all that much. I mean, how many games this year has the elements mattered all that much? I know for the Broncos, it actually ended up being earlier in the season with the after effects of the hurricane in New Jersey. So I'm fascinated to see what the NFL does, because you look at that too. I mean, the Eagles game, the Commanders game, maybe the Texans game, any of those road divisional matchups could be primetime matchups. So the Broncos are going to go from being completely ignored. They did not have a Sunday night football game in 2024 to, I think this year we're looking at probably the maximum number of games in the spotlight.
4 or 5. Yeah, I could see that look. And I think probably maybe the biggest, if we could choose one road game right now that we're looking at here in terms of their opponents that we think will probably get primetime treatment, obviously one of the divisional games you have to factor in. I think the Commanders game will probably be one. Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, it could be the whoever wins the Rookie of the Year and the runner-up. I think it's going to go like that in terms of that discussion there versus each other. I know they're the top 2 quarterbacks in the 2024 NFL draft class, and I think that would be a fun game to watch on primetime. Could you imagine Sunday Night Football, Broncos in D.C. against the Commanders? That would be a fun one to watch. Maybe Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. I don't see that one necessarily being a primetime game. I see that one maybe being like a late afternoon type game. Could be an 11 a.m. Mountain Time kickoff, obviously. I mean, it could go a variety of different ways. But if you had to choose, okay, let's say Denver gets 5 primetime games here in 2025, which is the max. Let's go through home games right now. Let's select. I think a matchup against the Chiefs will be a primetime game for them. Potentially the Cowboys at that point. I think the Bengals game, maybe even the Packers game could be that. I think it could be a coin flip between those 2 teams. Which ones do you think, home games and away games, do you think will get a primetime game if Denver does get 5 spots?
Yeah, I definitely feel like at least one of the Chiefs games and at least one of the Chargers games will be primetime for the Broncos. And then the Cowboys almost every week are a primetime team. I mean, so maybe that's an early season primetime game for the NFL, given the Cowboys' injury issues this year, the fact that the Cowboys are going to probably have a new head coach as well. That could be interesting. I think that those 3 games, it's always the Cowboys when you look. The Bengals game, given how this last year's game went, I mean, it's the Broncos-Bengals game from a couple weeks ago is being considered one of the craziest games of the year. I think the NFL is definitely going to want Joe Burrow versus Bo Nix in prime time. And then I think it's going to be the Commanders one that you mentioned, Cody. So the two divisional matchups, the Cowboys, the Commanders, and the Bengals, those would be my predictions that the Broncos are going to get. The maximum, I think, is 5 primetime games.
So 4 home primetime games and 1 road prime. I'm with it. I like it. Broncos country. We want to know how you feel as well. So to recap here once again, the opponents at Denver will face obviously the Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders twice. But at home, Denver will play the Dallas Cowboys, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Giants, the Tennessee Titans, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Green Bay Packers. They'll go on the road against the Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, but they'll play at the Houston Texans, at the Indianapolis Colts, at the Eagles, at the Commanders, and once again at the Jets. Suck there. So, well, I mean, I like it right now, and obviously, you know, once the schedule gets released next May, we'll go through and do a whole entire breakdown and a deep dive on it. We'll see about that. But how many primetime games do you think the Broncos will have here in 2025? Your thoughts on who they will play? Make sure you let us know as you're watching, listening to Locked On Broncos wherever you get your podcast. We're going to wrap up today's show by talking about how Sean Payton has come in and really kind of changed the culture and has developed this young and hungry mentality within this Broncos team. Is it enough that could help them push the Buffalo Bills maybe out of the playoffs? We'll tell you why we believe that could be the case here on today's episode of the show. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks, and it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that is where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, and you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. So check it out here today. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Once again, download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Rocket Money. And did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's happened to me before, and I'm sure it's happened to you. I've had a few subscriptions that I didn't even know that I was still paying for, and Rocket Money, they made it super easy to track them all down and to cancel them at my request. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances, and Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions and monitors your spending, and it helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year financially. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of over $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/Locked On. The fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is here, and we're going to break down how Sean Payton has come in and has changed the culture and has installed a mindset that is dangerous, I think, for other teams here in the NFL playoffs. Can a young and hungry Broncos team find a way to do it against Buffalo? We'll tell you why we believe that's the case. Just want to say thanks once again to everyone in Broncos country for making us your first listen. If you're not an everyday listener, you should become one, because we have you covered literally every single weekday all year long, and throughout the entire offseason, throughout the playoffs, whatever is going on with this team, you're going to stay on top of it by being an everydayer here at Locked On Broncos. Sayre, my friend, let's talk about something that has kind of been making waves here this week. I wrote an article over there on milehighsports.com about how a young and hungry Denver Broncos team could be dangerous in the NFL playoffs. We heard it in our postgame report when we heard from Riley Moss and Marvin Mims, where they said, hey, we're young and we're hungry. That has been something that Sean Payton has said. And I remember, I think it happened a little bit after training camp began. One thing we were talking about, Sean had brought it up in a presser. He said, I think that a young and hungry team is dangerous Denver has become a little bit of this young and hungry team, and it's a mindset that everybody in that locker room has bought in. And that is, I think, a byproduct of the standard and the culture that Sean Payton has now set in Denver when you really look at how disastrous the culture was from 2016 to 2022.
Especially at the end there, right, where the new ownership group was so embarrassed by the way the season went that they fired Nathaniel Hackett the day after Christmas. I mean, it was that bad that this new group that got fresh eyes on the organization and, signed off on re-signing Russell Wilson, giving him a new contract. Sean Payton came in and put his fresh eyes on the organization, and they put their trust in Sean Payton. And his mentality has always been like, we go back to the offseason where he's like, I've never won less than 7 games as an NFL head coach. I don't intend on doing so this year. Right. I mean, that's the mentality that he has. He's like, he basically said, I've got 2 middle fingers and I don't have, basically doesn't have the energy to use them at this point anymore. There's no reason to. He doesn't pay attention. I think Sean Payton does the perfect balance, Cody, of paying attention to what the media says without putting any stock into it. And that's what he talks about, that NFL train all the time, right? And he's like, you got to pay attention. There may be the occasion where he sees something, reads something, hears something. He's like, wait a second, who said that? And then he wonders who said it, and he figures out who said it. He's like, oh, yeah, because Sean Payton told the media on Monday, he's like, half these prognosticators that had negative opinions of the Broncos, he's like, half these people don't even know what they're talking about. And you and I have talked off camera many times, not about Sean specifically, but you'll ask people in the locker room what they think about this advanced stat or this prediction or whatnot. And just the way that the players and the coaches kind of laugh and shrug it off. Like, they hear it. They know that a lot of it is dumb and inaccurate. And I think that Sean Payton has done a great job of keeping this team focused on doing what they do well, which is, they've won 9 out of their 10 games by 9 or more points. Like, focus on the little things. They're a well-coached young team that's going to make some noise here now in the postseason.
And the games that they've lost, minus the Baltimore game, have all been by 1 score or less. I mean, you flip that result. Like Denver, when we look at some of the missed opportunities this season, Denver was, a play here or there away from winning maybe 12, 13 games this season, which is crazy to think about. Nobody had that expectation. I was so excited. I was able to drop that clip that I said back in training camp when I was there on air live as training camp was going on. And they asked me, like, how many games do you think the Broncos win? I said, I think they're going to win 10 games. If they get better quarterback play in just 2 games this year, I think they win 10 games. People are like, you should have seen the comments when that happened. Like, oh, this guy is crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you saw it early on. And this goes back to OTAs. Just, I felt like this team was entirely different than what we saw last year, right? Like you've had some change. You've had some new guys come in, and you've got new voices in that locker room. And some of the old voices that people listen to are gone. They're not there. So it's like, who's going to step up? This young Broncos football team is not concerned about the outside noise. That's one thing that I've found very clear, because if you look at it, this is, I think, something that could have been a problem. If this team was concerned about the outside noise, they would have folded after that 0-2 start. We've seen Broncos teams do that before. When they get into a rut, they're like, all right, hey, this is just who we are this year. We're going to accept it. This team's like, no, this isn't who we are. And they fought their way back, and they've won 10 games because of it, because they are young and they are hungry. So how does that present a challenge here for the Buffalo Bills? I mean, Sayre, you look at it from this standpoint, nobody expected the Broncos to be in the playoffs, right? Not a lot of people did, but these players in that locker room, they had that goal. They had that belief that they could get into the playoffs this year. And you look at a team like Buffalo, everyone's like, hey, this Buffalo Bills team, they're going to be a juggernaut. Absolutely. This is going to be the toughest team the Broncos have faced this year. But they're beatable. And that's something that the Broncos, in the position that they're in, being a young and hungry team that has a quarterback that we know is the guy now, that to me, I think, opens up a new realm of possibilities here, that when you get into the postseason, and you and I said it once, all you got to do is get a ticket to the dance and anything can happen. This young and hungry mindset that this team has, these guys are excited. And I think they're ready to go on the road and try to make a statement.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you look at the quarterback as the main reason why you should believe that the Broncos can pull off an upset, Cody. There's been posts thrown out there, this one from ML Football, pointing out that there's only 2 rookies in NFL history with 10-plus wins, 30-plus total touchdowns, and 4,000-plus total yards in a season. And they play for the 2 teams that went from being, hey, we need to draft a quarterback this year, to now we're in the playoffs. That's Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. And Bo Nix, I think, is the reason why you can believe that there's a chance that this team could win in the playoffs. Like, in years past, 2015 Broncos, like that team would have needed to play lights out defense and the offense capitalize on what the defense did, right? Because the offense struggled all year. And we went into the playoffs. Peyton Manning took over after Brock Osweiler got benched in the final regular season game. Like, there was no certainty that Peyton was going to be able to go on any run in the playoffs. And then the Broncos defense did.
What did he do? What did
Yeah,
Peyton do in the postseason, though? I mean, that AFC Championship game, it's like, do you remember how stressed you and I were going into that game? Just like, I wasn't in media at that time. I was just a fan, right? And I know I was stressed. I know I talked to you. You were stressed. What does Peyton do? Owen Daniels. He finds Owen Daniels. He marches downfield. Peyton Manning, what? He scrambles and he runs for a first down. We're like, okay, this is destiny right here. This could happen here with this young Broncos team.
Yeah. So create that destiny. Do the same thing. That's what you're talking about right there is exactly why I believe that Bo Nix can do those things. Like, he's that guy that when the Broncos need a play, he's going to be able to go out there and make the play. We saw it against Kansas City in the last week of the regular season. Yeah, their backups were out there. Who cares? I mean, Bo Nix can do this against anybody. He did it against the Bengals. He did it against the Chargers. People like to say he didn't play well.
Did it against the Chiefs when the Chiefs played, like the starters.
Did it against the Chiefs. I mean, shoot, he almost brought the Broncos back in week one. One of the worst games that he's played all year, his first NFL game. He almost brought them back against the Seahawks. Remember that late in the game when he was running the ball well? So he's got the it factor. He's got the ability to go on the road against Buffalo and say, I don't freaking care about how good the Bills are. Like, I'm going to go do what I do and make plays. And I think that's going to inspire the rest of this team.
Yeah. And look, I think that what Sean Payton has echoed as well throughout the entire season, saying, hey, like, these guys in that locker room, they look at Bo and they have this belief that, hey, we're okay. Like, we're not down and out. When we've got Bo in at quarterback, like that, I think is a great development here of this season here, because I think that there were times, I mean, gosh, you and I have been around for the quarterback carousel forever. Broncos country has as well. And there were times where it felt like being down 10-0 was a death sentence. And look, I think early on in the season when Denver would find themselves down 10-0 or 13, whatever, 13-3, there were times where like we've been in this position before here covering this team, and Denver's never had anyone that can get them out of it. But then Bo is the guy that can get them out of it. Like, we've seen him do that. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's not how it used to be here for this franchise. And I think that's exciting as well. And regardless of what happens here, if this Broncos team, whether they win or lose, they put up a great fight here against the Buffalo Bills. If they beat them, great. If they fall short, that's okay. But to me, it makes Denver a destination for, I think, or a lot of people want to go to be part of something special as it's developing and ongoing. I think there's a lot at stake here, not only in terms of just, hey, advancing the playoffs, maybe face the Kansas City Chiefs here once again, but more importantly, it's, hey, people are going to want to come to Denver. I think that's going to be a big sign. And I think it's also part of the culture that Sean Payton has created, and just even talking to players too. They praise the type of culture that Sean has created, the environment. And look, they got signs, they got messages up in the locker room. We can never tell you what those are, but you can see why these guys are have a belief in one another, and they're not so concerned about what anybody on the outside has to say.
No need to be, right? When you can believe. I mean, absolutely. We saw the guy. There was a picture floating around on Twitter, Cody, of a guy that was dressed up like Ted Lasso carrying around a believe sign. In the show, they've got the believe above his office. And I love it. I think that embodies this Broncos team so well, doesn't it? It's like, man, you inherited this sad sack of a roster. Everybody's making fun of you. Everybody's doubting you. Nobody believes that you can do it, but you internally have to believe first before everybody else in that 76,000 plus crowd stadium is going to believe. And I think we all have reason to believe now going into the playoffs, Cody, that this team can do some serious damage.
Now, we're excited about it, Broncos Country. We hope you're excited about it as well. With that said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for rocking with us, making us your first listen. Thank you for being an everydayer. If you're not an everydayer, become one so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. For all you everydayers, here's what you can expect on tomorrow's episode of the show. Sarah's going to sit down with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills to break down Sunday's big playoff matchup. Can Bo Nix overcome Von Miller? Can the Broncos upset the Buffalo Bills? Yes, they can. How are they going to do that? You get an extensive game preview of that. Plus, you get an NFL squad show. It is playoff time, and everyone around the NFL is sitting down to break down the postseason and the biggest storylines around the NFL. You can get that much more on tomorrow's episode of the show.